Okay, we left off on chapter 21. Minley and the buffalo boy pushed through the crowd as the sun burned the top of their heads. Minley, who was used to the spare harvest of her village, couldn't help but gaping at these tall mounds of food for sale at the market of green abundance. The street and open courtyard were filled with umbrella-covered stands and stalls, flaunting jade-colored cabbages, curled cucumbers, purple eggplants, and tangy oranges. Glossy, sugared hawthorn berries, like rubies on a stick, made Minley's mouth water. I don't see the king anywhere, Minley said. Well, maybe he's not here yet, the buffalo boy said. I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to find him here, Minley said. Now, in the daylight, the buffalo boy's friend didn't seem as extraordinary. What would the king be doing at a street market anyway? Well, she said he'd be here, so he will, the buffalo boy said, his mouth making a stubborn line. Hey, get away from that! A vendor yelled as the buffalo attempted to eat frosty green lettuce. The buffalo boy quickly pulled his buffalo away. Get your buffalo out of here! The vendor shouted, as red-faced as the radishes he was selling. I'd better take him away, the buffalo boy said, pulling the buffalo's head away from the arrays of tempting food. He's hungry, so I should probably take him to pasture. Okay, I'll stay here, Minley said. You don't need to look for the king with me. Okay, the boy said. But if you need a place to stay tonight, you know where my hut is. If not, maybe I'll see you around. Good luck. Thanks, Minley said. But as he carelessly waved goodbye, she realized she might not ever see him again. Before he disappeared from sight, she grabbed the last coin out of her bag and ran to him. Wait, Minley said. Here, take this. No, 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 the boy laughed. I don't need that. You should keep your money. But, Minley started, but the boy had already turned around. Goodbye, she heard him call, and the buffalo snorted a farewell as well. Minley smiled wryly to herself. Now what? Minley thought, as she wandered past stalls, weaving around merchants and customers. How am I supposed to find the king here? Please, please, spare a piece of fruit for an old man, a voice creaked. Minley turned around and saw a wrinkled poor man begging at a peach stand. He was dirty and bent, and his clothes looked as if they were made from rags used to wash floors. Please, he begged. Please, I'm so thirsty. One small peach? Your smallest? He said to the peach vendor. Go away, old man, the fat vendor said. No money, no peach. Please, the beggar said again, weakly. Pity a tired old man. Get away from here, you worthless beggar, the vendor spat out, or I'll call the guards on you. The vendor's loud voice had attracted attention from the passers-by, and a small crowd began to form in front of the peach stand. Oh, it's disgraceful to treat an old man like that, someone murmured. Just give him a peach. Oh, all of you are so generous with my property, the vendor glared at the crowd. If you care so much about him, you buy him a peach. As Minley watched the beggar's hands outstretched and shaking with hunger, she felt a sharp pang inside of her. It reminded her of Ba. reaching out with his last chopsticks, reaching out with his last chopstickful of rice for her fish. The copper coin she had offered to the buffalo boy was still warm in her hand. She could almost feel her heart beating around its round edges. Here, she said, handing the vendor the coin. Then she picked the largest peach on the stand and handed it to the old man. He bowed to her gratefully and eagerly ate the whole peach. Forgetting about the inner city and the palace for the moment, Minley just watched him. In fact, as if under a spell, the whole crowd stood and watched him swallow the fruit until all he held was a peach pit in his hand. "Oh, thank you," the beggar said in a much stronger voice, and he bowed to the onlooking people. "This peach was so delicious. I wish for all of you to be able to taste it. If you would humor an old man and stay a while, I'll share my good fortune." So the old man took out a small stick from his pocket, and he bent down. In the dirt next to the black bricks he dug a small hole and planted his peach pit. He stuck his stick upright in the little mound, and then he asked for some water. Minley, who was now completely fascinated, took out her water jug and handed it to him. As he poured water onto his stick, it trembled, and was she imagining it? It almost looked like it was starting to grow. And it was growing. The stick grew higher and higher and thicker until it was the width of Minley's arm. When she could no longer see the top of it, pink flowers and branches began to blossom out from it. As the sweet scent of flowers filled the air, Minley realized the stick had become a peach tree. The crowd of people seemed to realize this too, as they all gaped at it open-mouthed. Even the stingy vendor left his fruit stand to stare at the tree in awe. Like pink snow, the petals fell from the tree and made a soft carpet on the dirt. Green leaves sprouted, and as they cascaded over the branches, pale moon-colored balls like pearls developed. Almost as if they were small balloons being blown with air, they grew into round fruit, blushing pink and red as they developed. Soon the tree was heavy with them, and the air was full of the enchanting smell of ripe peaches. Children gathered around and stared longingly at the luscious fruit, while the adults gulped with their mouths watering. Finally, the old man reached up, plucked a peach from the tree, and handed it to one of the people in the crowd. "Please," he said, waving his hand, "help yourself." The crowd needed no other urging. Young children climbed the tree and passed down the fruit, while the taller adults simply stretched and grabbed. A boy with a tired horse climbed onto its back to reach an especially red peach that called him. Before long, everyone's mouths were full of soft, sweet peach flesh and groans of delight. Even the peach vendor, his stand forgotten, stood under the tree with his eyes closed contentedly and peach juice dribbling out of his mouth. Minley, however, did not join in on the feast of the peaches. "If I hadn't been eating peaches all the way to the city," Minley said to herself, "I'd be the first one climbing that tree." But as she was slightly tired of peaches, Minley saw what no one else did. She noticed that every time someone plucked a peach from the tree, a peach from the fruit stand disappeared. "The beggar is using the vendor's peaches for his tree," Minley laughed at herself as she glanced at him through the fruit-eating crowd. The beggar was watching with an amused look, and suddenly Minli saw that the beggar wasn't really that old at all. He must be a magician. Maybe he can help me get to the inner city. So slowly Minli edged towards him. As she weaved her way to him, the last peach was picked from the tree, and the leaves and branches began to disappear. The tree trunk seemed to shrivel up in itself, and it grew thinner and shorter and shorter. The crowd had finished their peaches, and the ground was littered with peach pits. When Minli finally reached the beggar, the tiny twig of the tree vanished underneath the pile of peach pits, and the beggar was turning to leave. "Wait," Minli said, grabbing his arm. However, as Minli grabbed hold of his sleeve, it pulled back, and a glint of gold shone. Hastily, the beggar pushed back his sleeve, but the quick glance was enough for Minli to see that he wore a gold bracelet in the shape of a dragon. They stared at each other. Minli's quick-thinking mind somersaulted. "Only the imperial family is allowed to use the image of a dragon," Dragon had said. "Everyone knows a golden dragon is always and only worn by kings," said the buffalo boy. These words flashed in her mind, and Minli could hardly breathe. "Oh, you're wearing a dragon," Minli gasped. Only the only is allowed to wear. You must be." "Where's that beggar?" A loud, angry shout cut through the chaos, and Minli recognized the vendor's voice. "He stole my peaches! I'm gonna get him!" And quickly the beggar shook off Minli from his arm and began to run. She stared in shock as she finished her sentence. "You must be," Minli whispered to the ragged, disappearing figure, "the king." Chapter 22. Minli shook herself from her shock. "The king," Minli said. "I can't lose him now." And in a panic, she began to run after the tattered figure. And it was quite a chase. Or it would have been if the beggar had realized he was being followed. He wove in and out, around people and around bins of rice, each step taking them closer and closer to the unused areas of the city. Behind a pile of discarded baskets, Minli thought she had lost him, but luckily the gray sleeve of his loose jacket waved at her, and she saw him round the walled corner of the inner city. As an abandoned wagon hid her from his view, she saw him push against a portion of the wall. With a slow groan, the whole wall moved. "Oh, it's a secret door to the inner city," Minli gasped, and she was able to reach it just before it closed completely. With both hands, she pressed hard against the door, and it pushed open. And like a lid of a jewelry box, the door opened into a landscape of radiant colors. The bamboo, pine, and plum leaves seemed to shine in the sun as if carved from emeralds, and the accents of the pink and red flowers were like nestled rubies. Steps away from her feet, Minli could see a patterned pathway made of water-worn pebbles. The central jade-green lake mirrored the arching tiled roofs of the pavilions and the rough beauty of large weathered rock sculptures. A winding covered walkway lifted up from the cloudy water like a lotus flower. It could only be the palace garden. But Minli barely noticed this. Instead, she stood with large eyes, staring at the figure in front of her. The beggar was wiping his face with a delicate white cloth, and Minli saw again that he wasn't an old man at all. In fact, he was younger than Ba. The gray of his hair wiped away with the cloth as well, and his beard and head were as glossy black as Minley's. His gray rags had been cast off in a pile next to him, and he was clothed in a bright yellow silk, the color of the sun. Intricate dragons and multicolored clouds that matched the designs of the gold bracelet he wore were embroidered on his robes and glittered in the light. There was no doubt that he was the king. Then the king turned around and saw her. At his glance, Minley shrank to the ground in a humble kowtow. "Your Majesty," Minley breathed, and her knees could feel the thumping of her heart in her chest. "Cut!" Minley heard him say, and she peeked up to see the king looking at her with the same amused expression he'd had as a beggar, watching the people eat the peaches. He shook his head at her. With his eyes twinkling at her, he could have been the young father of one of her village friends. "And by you, my little benefactor. Ah, I knew you were a clever one." "Your Majesty! Your Majesty!" A chorus of voices came floating through the air towards them, and Minley could see a parade of servants in the distance running across the zigzagged bridge. "Well, you mustn't be caught by them," the king said to Minley. "Then they would find out all about my little adventures, and then where would I be?" And he pulled Minley up to her feet and pushed her behind one of the giant gnarled stone carvings, kicking his rags over her. "Quickly, quickly," he said, "and don't say a word. I command you not to say a word or to come out until I say so." Minley clutched the rough stone and made herself as small as possible. Hundreds of footsteps were approaching, like falling rain from a thunderstorm. "What is this?" the king demanded. "Has war been declared on the city?" "Your Majesty," an out-of-breath voice said, "we've been searching for you." "Searching for me?" the king said. "I have been here in the garden for hours." "Oh, well, we must have missed you," the voice stuttered. "No one could find you. The guards hadn't seen you, and we were afraid that—" "You feared the king of the city of bright moonlight had been spirited away?" The king laughed. "Ha! Not this time, Counselor Chu. However, I do feel the wish to commune with the moon tonight." "Your Majesty?" the voice said. "Yes," the king said decisively. "Tonight I wish to be alone in the garden with the moon. Have a meal brought to me in the Clasping the Moon pavilion, and do not disturb me until the morning." "Yes, your Majesty," the voice said, and Minley couldn't help but just take a tiny peek. She saw rows and rows of finely dressed people kneeling with their heads on the ground in front of the king. Their rich silk clothing shimmered in the fading sunlight. One man, dressed in black, kneeled closer to the king, separate from the rest. Minley guessed that he was Counselor Chu. "Actually, bring me 2 meals," the king said, and glanced towards Minley. She caught his eye and quickly shrank back out of sight. 2 meals? 2 meals, your Majesty?" Counselor Chu asked, with just the faintest question in his voice. "Yes, 2 meals," the king said. "I shall honor the spirit of the moon with her own meal, since she will be keeping me company. It is only fair." Yes, your Majesty," the counselor said. Minley could only guess how puzzled he was, but he was well trained enough to keep it out of his voice. "In an hour's time," the king said, "I shall be at the Clasping the Moon pavilion. I want the food waiting for me and nothing else. I do not wish to be disturbed by anyone this evening." "Yes, your Majesty," the voice said again, and Minley could hear the shuffling and swishing of silk as the group rose and took leave of the king. "They've gone," the king said in a low voice. "You can come out now." So Minley crawled out from behind the sculpture. "Well, my little friend," he said to her, "now that you know who I am, come walk with me and tell me who you are." And that's where we stop for today.